Humanities in Pennsylvania presents the Humanities Profile of Children's Authors, part of the Profiles in Literature series featuring interviews with persons prominent in American literature for children. The moderator for this series is Dr. Jaqueline Shachter of Temple University. Today's special guest is Kristin Hunter.
Among the well-known authors of Greater Philadelphia associated with the university is our guest, Kristin Hunter. What do you teach at the University of Pennsylvania?
I currently teach a short story workshop in short fiction. Last spring I taught a course in backgrounds of Afro-American literature, in which I went from folklore to literature with about 5 major writers and a few lesser-known ones.
Must be a pleasure to be on the faculty of your alma mater.
Yes, it was a dream that came true. It came about a few years ago.
Welcoming you from Temple University's English and American Studies departments is my colleague, Philip Yanella.
Hi, Kristin.
Hi, Philip.
Going to enjoy this, I hope.
I think so. Yes.
Also with us is your friend, Kristin Hunter, Carolyn Field, Coordinator of Work with Children for the Free Library of Philadelphia, my companion on the Profiles series.
Great to have you here, Kristin. You know, she's a very active member of our Children's Reading Roundtable and is always helping us promote quality books for children.
Well, I thank you for saying that. I thank you for saying that. I hope you mean it.
I do. I do.
Kristin Hunter is known for her children's and adult books, all published by Charles Scribner's Sons. We'll look at the books for young people. The Soul Brothers and Sister Lou, with jacket design by Ilse Cohen. Guests in the Promised Land, with jacket photograph by Terry Smith. And Boss Cat, illustrated by Harold Franklin. The photograph of Kristin Hunter on the jacket of her latest adult book, The Lakestown Rebellion, was taken by her husband, John I. Latany. Here we see him with Kristin Hunter in a photograph at the Walt Whitman Poetry Center. Until late last year, Ms. Hunter was on the board of directors of that center. We'll share some photographs John took of Kristin in the Philadelphia area. Most of them revolve around the University of Pennsylvania. Who are these men with you in this picture?
Well, from left to right, we have Dr. Joel Canaro, former chairman of the English department, now president of the Modern Language Association, and Dr. Jerry Mangione, a local author of both adult and children's books, and a professor emeritus of English there. And far left is Dean Vartan Gregorian, Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences and soon-to-be Provost of the University of Pennsylvania.
I see. Jerry Mangione is the author of The Dream and the Deal, among other books.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Who are these colleagues with you at the University Museum?
Dr. Nell Painter, a professor of history and author of The Exodusters. Dr. Joseph Washington, chairman of the Department of Afro-American Studies.
What was the occasion?
It was the first annual Black Students Award dinner.
How fine, how fine.
Yes, and I might say that it was probably the first time such an occasion could take place, because when I was an undergraduate there weren't enough black undergraduates to fill the room.
I see. Progress.
Progress.
And who's in front of the kiosk at the university with you?
That's my first cousin, Billy, as I call her. Dr. Merle-Ann Manigault, MD. She's a physician practicing in Berlin, Germany, but she was here last spring and she came to some of my classes because she's interested in literature and the arts and all those things.
Who's across the table from you at this restaurant near the university campus?
Sonia Sanchez, a Philadelphia writer for both adults and children, who had been on the faculty at Pennsylvania and is now at Temple. Behind her is Imamu Amiri Baraka, also known as Leroy Jones, who was a guest lecturer at my course last spring
How
in
fun.
Afro-American literature.
And here we see Kristin Hunter autographing the survivors and her children's book, Boss Cat, at the book department of Wanamaker's department store in Philadelphia. Isn't the gentleman in glasses the illustrator of Boss Cat?
That's right. That's Harold Franklin, who illustrated Boss Cat for us and also has written several books of his own, including a very popular young people's book, Once Around the Track.
Oh, how fine, how fine. Finally, we have this handsome photograph of Kristin Hunter in the port of Philadelphia with the port in the background. These scenes highlight. Oh, did you want to say something about that one?
Only that my husband had been a merchant seaman, and that particular ship was one on which he worked, which was then in dry dock there.
Oh.
We happened to find it, and that's why.
Oh, I see. It had sentimental
Enclosed it.
attachment too. These scenes do show Kristin Hunter's ties to the city of brotherly love. Philip Yanella wants to probe how those ties enter into your books.
Yeah, as I read your books, aside from the Lakestown Rebellion, which I know is set in New Jersey, I immediately think, I believe from page 1, even in short stories, that the settings are Center City, Philadelphia, or North Philadelphia. Am I right about that?
You are right, but probably because you live in Philadelphia.
Uh-huh.
I say you are right because I live in Philadelphia. I use those places as settings. But I've had letters from children and even young adults from all over the country saying, amazing that you know Boston so well. Amazing that you know Chicago so well. How could you know Los Angeles so well? This is because of a not so sneaky trick I use. I try not to identify the city too closely. I try to pick the features of, let's say, Broad Street, Ridge Avenue, South Street particularly. And these are things you find on any large urban strip in the inner city all over the country. And I do not identify specifically. This way I also avoid all these letters from little nitpickers who would find something slightly out of kilter, you know.
Something unrealistic detail.
They would say, yeah, the hat department is not on the first floor at Bonnewood's, it's on the second floor. This way I avoid that.
But your books are essentially about the black urban experience.
Up until a point, the books you have read have been, but some of my short stories, if you recall, had some southern suburban things, and my new book has a definitely semi-suburban, more country flavor. I've been moving out of the inner city. Actually, one of the stories I know dealt with the problems of a southern family moving up to an inner city setting.
I suppose that the actual locale of stories, of your stories, doesn't matter all that much. I think that's one of the things I'm hearing from you now. I tend to think that your strong point, or the strong point of your novels and of the short stories, is characterization. And I'd like to ask, how do you get your ideas for characters?
I get my ideas from characters. It's very funny. When I teach, I usually draw a concentric circle, a series of concentric circles, starting with myself or oneself, and I go outward from that to family, people living with, friends, acquaintances, strangers. And then I say, where do you think I get most of my characters from? I say, strangers met or glimpsed only once. That's the outside, the periphery. And they usually are right. That is where I get my characters from. Overheard, perhaps, glimpsed or seen only once, and then I build into those fragmentary figures bits and pieces of other people I've known, remembered in the distance, and come out with full-fledged people.
And how do you organize these tasks? How do you organize your writing? That's always a question that I like to ask of writers. How do you go about the task of writing a short story?
A short story is different from a novel because it's short, and I can do it in a short space of time.
Novels are longer.
But when I have a long piece of work to do, like a novel, I don't organize my time so much as I assign myself a quota of 5 pages a day. 5
Wow.
handwritten pages on long legal pads, okay?
Wow, it sounds like Hemingway. Like he did the
And
same
I
thing.
usually procrastinate, and sometimes I'm doing those 5 pages at 4 o'clock instead of in the morning. But I rigidly get that quota done. If I have to stay up till 12 o'clock that night, 5 pages a day, adds up to maybe a chapter a week, and an extra week for typing because I write in longhand sometimes. But I must do 5 pages a day.
If you miss a day, what happens? If illness overtakes you, for instance, does that mean the next day that are you
No.
aiming at that chapter?
No. I'm not that rigid with myself. No.
But it sounds like hard, organized work. A
That's
job.
the only way you can. It is a job like any other. It's the only way you can complete something long. One book I actually wrote in a day. I wrote all day and I had a book. That little one, Boss Cat.
What a joy.
And most of the stories were, as I got into the doing of them, were very swiftly completed. They just rolled along very easily.
You know, another thing I've noticed, aside from characterization in your books and the way the characters just seem to shine forth so beautifully, is that well, there's a tone, there's a spirit of hope in your books. You're talking about a black urban experience, though there are stories that deal with the Southern experience. And yet I don't see, as I read the books, the kind of degradation and horror that I've come to be used to in reading about the American urban experience.
Well, I would think that perhaps the degradation and horror has been too much emphasized. You know, even in the inner city, there are blacks who are going to church every Sunday, putting meals on the table for their children, having decent family lives. What you read about, as in everything else in America, is, you know, whatever is disgraceful. That's the news, that's the most popular fiction, that's the most popular subject matter for television, you know. And what has been overlooked is the positive side of black life. And then I guess I also am a hopeless optimist. I see what's good around
That's
me,
lovely to
and I
hear,
celebrate
yeah.
it. I celebrate it.
That's lovely to hear.
I may not stay that way, okay, but I have been up till now. I've been criticized because I have happy endings in my books, all my books.
You've been criticized for that.
Absolutely. It's not fashionable to have happy endings.
And it never has been fashionable in our literature, whether it's children's literature, well, I suppose adult literature is what I am talking about. It's fashionable to have characters crashing at the end.
That's right, or wondering what it all means and leaving the reader wondering
your
what it
characters
means.
know what it means at the end.
Yes, and sometimes I think when books end not with the characters not knowing what it means, I wonder if the author knows what it means.
And what about the readers?
See, and I want to say, like the child at the parade, this emperor has no clothes on, you know? This author doesn't know what he means.
You know, I
Sometimes.
think this is one of the differences between adult and children's literature, that adult literature can end in hopelessness, but children's literature should end in hopefulness. Children should have some hope after they've read a book. They've got their whole lives to live through.
Right. Well, I originally felt that was my main purpose for the upbeat ending, you know, in the Soul Brothers and Sister Lou. But a lot of the criticism of that ending, plus a lot of what I've learned since about the true nature of the music industry, has led me to want very much to write a sequel, because I think I gave them false hope in that particular book. All right?
And you think you're going to come down in the sequel? No, I don't think you
Oh, I think I will come
shouldn't have
down.
to.
I think it will come down and then rise up to a happier ending, happy ending of a more realistic nature than making it as a singing star.
Wait, Kristin, you were established as an author of adult books. What led you to write the Soul Brothers and Sister Lou?
Someone asked me.
Someone asked you?
That's right. The juvenile editor at Scribner's, who was then Janet Loringer,
Oh, yes.
wrote to me and asked what I consider a children's book. And at that time, I put the idea aside. What do they mean, a kiddie book, children's book? I don't know. Why would I
there
do
you go.
that? Well, yes, I know. But I get that also in various circles. No. But then I got an idea for one. Somehow when you're asked, the ideas come sometime. And again, the subject matter began with strangers. I lived in a Broad and South Street apartment, and there were a group of young people who hung out in an alley 3 stories below. I always knew when spring would come. The first beer bottle would be broken in the alley, and then this gorgeous harmony, 4-part harmony, would come drifting up to the porch, the deck I had. And this would go on all summer, as long as the weather was good. So I began thinking about writing about a singing group. And I had to put a girl in there, because I always wanted to be a singer myself.
Well, is there anything autobiographical in the Soul Brothers and Sister Lou, beside your living in that area and seeing these things?
Not really. Not much of anything, no, because I didn't grow up. Well, I guess I grew up in my first childhood years were spent in a row house neighborhood, but I didn't grow up in that kind of large family. I didn't kind of have those kind of problems. Very little that I can recall as autobiographical. I try not to write about myself. As I said, I try to write about others.
But you can't help putting yourself into it somehow.
Oh,
your
yeah, I am
thoughts
everywhere.
And ideas.
I feel that I'm everywhere and nowhere present in my fiction. That's the way it should be. I'm there everywhere in my attitudes and feelings and ideas, but the characters occupy the foreground.
Well, you know, on the jacket of God Bless the Child, it speaks of, you speak of your complex racial identity. Now, what do you mean by that? What
did I mean by that? That was a long time ago.
Yes.
And since then, Roots has been published, and I have traced my family. And it's not quite as complex as I thought. All right?
So,
I am Afro-American, at least 5 generations, on at least 2 sides, with, I think, American Indian on at least 2 sides.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, that's
But that is
fascinating.
probably what I meant. What I knew about, I knew I had to be a mixture.
Do you think that authors should write only about things which they themselves have experienced?
Obviously not, since I use my imagination so much with what I do. No, I think it's a very difficult question to answer. One has to be able to empathetically experience, you know, what other people live.
Point.
One has to be able to draw an analogy between what this person has gone through and something perhaps in your own experience that is humanly similar. But direct experience, no. Above all, I don't think one should write about one's current or recent experiences while still emotionally
too close.
Involved in them. Distant past, yes.
You know, one of my favorite books is with everybody is Guest in the Promised Land.
All right.
Now that's a series of short stories
Right.
that all have sort of a common theme. Did you sit down and write this as a book, or did you write them separate stories and eventually put them together? What happened? How did that come
you
about?
don't know
'Cause
that
it's just great.
story. Well, see, I wrote those originally as a series of textbook stories for another publisher.
Oh.
And, excuse me, we were talking in there about the importance of copyrights. I insisted on retaining my copyrights so I could publish them the way I wanted them in a book, because the other publisher, the textbook editors, were very pushy about changing them around and messing with the editing, and I had to fight very hard. I said, well, eventually I'll publish them the way I want them. And so there they are, intact. Those that were accepted for the final book. There are a few that were never in that book. But I didn't write them thinking they would be a book collection at the time. I was hoping they would be.
Well, they fit beautifully together.
I want to comment on Kristin Hunter's sense of humor in many of her books, beginning with B.G. Scose from Guests in the Promised Land. I think your play on color is great. When you have young black Frederick Douglass Jackson be told by a white mortician he has to go to a colored pet cemetery to bury his dog B.G., who's white all over.
Oh, White Spitz, yes, yes.
That's adorable. I even like the sequencing of stories in that book. Your Boss Cat, set in the benign neglect apartments, is largely humorous. You've mixed humor with pathos in The Survivors, where the main character, one of the main characters' initials, BJ, 13-year-old BJ, stands for Bond Jewelers.
Well, this is sort of an inside joke, you know. You have to watch what women see when they first wake up after the delivery room, you know. And what she saw was Bond Jewelers. But humor, it's especially appropriate when you mention The Survivors, is one technique of black survival.
Of course.
Absolutely.
Of course.
The greater the pressures, the more the need for a sense of humor, the more the need to laugh.
But do you record humorous book possibilities often and then later refer to notes? How do you work it?
No, I think that it comes as I go along. It comes as I go along, sure. I'm a natural...
More serious is The Soul Brothers and Sister Lou. What is its intended theme?
Well, its intended theme, as I recall, was to help this young girl find her way from being what I called an outsider to an insider, to become part of a group, to belong. And she found it through music, through belonging to this music group. That was its essential theme.
I'm glad that you commented about the ending of The Soul Brothers and Sister Lou, because one of my students wanted me to ask you if it doesn't emphasize materialistic values.
It does emphasize materialistic values, but you must realize that to people who've always been very poor and have never had an opportunity to reject the material goods of this society, materialistic values are a bit irrelevant, you know. Let us, they say, I think, have all these materials and then decide whether we're going to reject materialistic values or not.
That's right.
I've once heard you say that to people who have no shoes, going barefoot is not any big shakes.
It's not romantic.
Right,
No.
it's not
We've had
romantic at all.
Poverty chic recently, but the people wearing the poverty chic clothing, I usually buy it at boutiques, $60 for these, you know, hand-me-down jeans, whereas the really poor have to go to thrift shops. It's not chic at all.
You know, you were commenting about what you're teaching at the University of Pennsylvania. I wonder if you have any plans to teach elsewhere.
Yes, I'm going to visit Emory University in Atlanta for the winter, what they call winter and spring quarters. This is January through June of '79.
What will you be teaching there?
I'm not even sure about what I'm going to do the second quarter, except that there will be one writing course. I'm going to teach a short story course, a course in writing the short story, and a course in writing for children.
Oh,
I understand that's
fine.
already popular with the students. They're signing up.
Fine. How fine. I wish I could take your course. It's Dr. Yanella, I know you had a question for...
Yeah, well, I can tie it together this way. That's about your future. I'd like to ask about something you wrote and, well, that you won a prize for, the Fund for the Republic Prize, in 1955. It's a TV documentary called Minority of One. Can you tell us something about that?
Yes, now that was based on real experience. I had a very brief career as an elementary teacher. All right? And they had just integrated the schools in Camden, New Jersey. This is why it was a documentary. And most of the parents had defied the integration by yanking their children out into a parochial school, which conveniently was made available to the diocese by the city the moment the state constitution integrating the schools, this was back in the 50s, went into effect. Okay, so the school suddenly became 85 to 90% black and 10% white. And in my own classroom, this was reflected. And I had one little white girl who was, I would say, quite literally insane. And while I'm not a psychiatrist now, and certainly wasn't then, I thought I could detect the cause of her insanity. Because her parents were bigots, and they were telling her, don't associate with these children, don't have anything to do with them, but her desires were to be friendly with them, and her behavior was really something. So she was the minority of one, a white child in an all-black class.
Sounds interesting.
And that's what I won the project.
Why did you give up teaching for writing?
I went through several other jobs before I became a creative writer. They were writing jobs. I'd always wanted to be a writer, for one thing. Teaching was something that was sort of forced upon me by my family, who thought it was the only safe occupation for a woman. But above all, I could not control a classroom of 38 active youngsters ranging in age from 7 to 14 in something called a third grade.
38.
38, well, that's not unusual in the
No,
Philadelphia
some-
schools now.
Parochial schools have 80 in one class.
In the public schools, 38 is not that unusual
No,
at all.
not now.
But I didn't have the force of character, the discipline, the toughness, the right meanness to make those youngsters sit and listen and learn.
We're delighted you switched. I'm going to have to say thank you very much, Kristin Hunter.
Thank you.
Kristin Hunter's first book for young people, The Soul Brothers and Sister Lou, won a prize from the National Council on Interracial Books for Children, the Mass Media Brotherhood Award of the National Conference of Christians and Jews, and the Lewis Carroll Shelf Award. Her book for adults, The Landlord, was released as a film by United Artists. Her Guests in the Promised Land was a finalist for the National Book Award and recipient of the Christopher Award. We look forward to continued recognition of you in the future.
Thank you. Thank you very much.